Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil on the show. It's our first edition of the postseason pod. Oregon season is over, obviously. They finished 13-2 on the season. They reached the Peach Bowl semifinals of the college football playoffs. And the harsh reality of this sport is there is zero time for reflection, for look backs, and all of that for us in the media, and more specifically and more importantly, those inside the Oregon football facility. Because within a day of getting back to Eugene, Oregon had official visitors on campus. They had end of season meetings with players, and the fallout and the additions have started. And it's been a whirlwind. There's probably been, what, Erik, 20-ish transactions in the last 24, 36 hours?
Sunday and now Monday alone, there are 17.
Yes. So it's been a whirlwind. There's probably going to be more coming in, going out.
Mm-hmm.
The portal closes here later this week. So in the sense of not having a 3-hour podcast, because we could realistically do that if we wanted to. I don't think listeners want to sit here for 3 hours and listen to podcasts on Oregon football in one sitting. Now, we break that up, which is what we're going to do. Today's show is going to be specifically geared towards the retention pieces of the show, of the program, the big announcements there that happened Sunday afternoon. And then we're going to start, though, with the biggest probably news from a newsy perspective is Oregon going out on Monday morning and securing the verbal commitment from transfer portal quarterback Dylan Raiola of Nebraska, a former 5-star player, 2-year starter at Nebraska before he suffered his injury this season. Midway through the year, he was only able to play just about 2/3 of the Cornhuskers season. November 1st, he got hurt in a loss to USC. But this is a big move for Oregon. It's a top 15 player overall in the transfer portal. He's like the 4th or 5th best portal quarterback. And it's one that he entered the portal and he and his camp attached Oregon to his name. And it was wondering if, well, how serious is Oregon going to be about bringing in Dylan Raiola on their end? Because there was no contact allowed until the portal opened. When Raiola went in, a couple days later, he's now an Oregon Duck.
Yeah, by the way, we're calling this the Good News Podcast. All good news. Just the players they've added, the players they've retained. Figured we owed that to Duck fans who've had some bad news over the Friday was brutal. So here's some positive stuff. The Raiola ad is interesting, right, Matt? The response seems to be pretty mixed. I think there are Oregon fans
Very Bo Nix-ish.
Yeah, and I think there's also like the Patrick Mahomes of it all, where this guy seems to be kind of carrying himself in a manner that is, and hey, Patrick Mahomes might end up being the greatest quarterback of all time, but at a certain point you kind of have to be your own person. And I think that for whatever reason, like I've got a bunch of friends who texted me in the last hour or so since this kind of broke, and we're kind of disappointed just because they don't like that whole mentality thing, and it's divorced from what's on the field. But I'll also say, like, and you dive into the stats here, this is going to have to be, I used this term before, Oregon is kind of become a quarterback rehabilitation center. There's some work that needs to be done here, and it's encouraging that Raiola is apparently open to sitting a year behind Dante Moore, who, by the way, hasn't finalized a decision. That has to be made by Wednesday. That's the deadline for Oregon draft decisions. So there's a couple of days here we're uncertain. But if Dante comes back, Raiola seemingly is okay with sitting a year, working in the system and getting ready. And frankly, like that seems like something that may need to happen. And I'm you just kind of look at it. He did not play very well in 2025. I know the counting stats tell you one thing, and they're not terrible counting stats, right? Like 18 touchdowns, 6 picks, completed was it just over 70% of his passes. Like those are good metrics, but if you dive into some of the PFF stuff, had half as many big time throws, his grades dropped significantly in Big Ten play, was pretty brutal frankly, if you look at this, like passing grades, here's his Big Ten passing grades: 63.7 against Michigan. And then I'll just read these down: 42.3, 54.9, 62.1, 59.3, 49.3. And for context, Dante Moore was in the 80s to 90s for all Big Ten games, with the exception of Indiana and Iowa. So you're looking at a quarterback here who has all the talent in the world, was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, 6'3", 230. We know he's got the arm talent, some really up and down moments at Nebraska. So this is going to be kind of fascinating to see how it plays out. And I guess one other thing, and there's many other things, but one thing I'll toss back to Matt with is, I just wonder, when is he available to actually be like a full-time practice participant coming off this broke his fibula in November. That's usually like a 2.5, 3 to 4 month recovery period. I imagine he's good by spring ball, but if this is a situation where some stuff lingers and Dante does go pro, you might be in a spot where your de facto starting quarterback's not really available to be the guy in spring. And that could be something just to be aware of here. It's possible he's totally fine and cleared, but that's something that's also in the back of my head.
Among quarterbacks that attempted at least 250 dropbacks this season, the overall grades for those quarterbacks, Dylan Raiola ranks 100th in the country. Mm-hmm. Now, some context here. John Mateer, a playoff quarterback, ranked just 4 spots higher at 96. You look at DJ Lagway, who was considered one of the most sought-after portal players at the position. When he entered, he was 87th. Marcel Reed of Texas A&M, another playoff team, their quarterback, 83rd. So yeah, you can find some talent down below with this list. Alonzo Barnett, JMU's quarterback, was 67th in the country. But there's clear growth that needs to happen with Dylan Raiola at Oregon. And I think this addition, and you bring up the injury point, and this kind of segues into my view of this, I don't necessarily think Dan Lanning is going to hitch his wagon to a Dylan Raiola who can't participate fully in spring football and not have that important time period if he's going to be your starting quarterback in 2026. I look at this as this is maybe a sign that Dante Moore is coming back to Oregon and that Raiola has some clear areas of improvement that are needed on the field. He needs to get healthy off the field. This feels like a redshirt season. This feels like you're going to show up, you're going to get yourself healthy, you're going to take a crash course and graduate, and the development of the quarterback you at Oregon, much like Bo Nix went through, much like most recently Dante Moore went through, and you're going to come out on the other end going into the 2027 season as the starting quarterback with a revamped skill set, a revamped career, reset, if you will. Now, if Dante Moore goes pro, then the questions become pretty big here because you're right. Like the lack of big time throws, the production at the Big Ten level dropped off. He did have a really good game and a really close loss at home to Michigan, where he threw for 308 yards, 3 touchdowns to 1 interception, completed 73% of his passes. But you look at other games like a loss at Minnesota, no touchdowns, no interceptions, threw under 200 yards. Even a win against a Northwestern team, just 141 yards to 1 touchdown and 1 interception, completed a high rate, 72%. And then when he got hurt against USC, he was 10 of 15 for 91 yards and a touchdown. Well, don't really know what that could have been like.
I think he played pretty well in that game. I remember watching some of it.
Yes. He played really well against Cincinnati, another bowl team, week 1. But this was, I just look at this as this is the first domino. And if Dante Moore comes back, I think this is a huge addition. It's going to be give him a year of redevelopment and reset of his career. But if Dante Moore doesn't come back, this is the quarterback addition that you feel like the biggest risk, the biggest gamble by Dan Lanning's staff in the portal at this position in his time.
That's a good way of putting it. This is the biggest gamble, right? Because Bo was a bit of a gamble at the time in terms of he hadn't had a great third season at Auburn, but everybody knew how talented Bo was. He was a former 5-star recruit, and I guess that Bo was the closest parallel in terms of like former 5-star, had multiple years of starting. It didn't always look great. Brought him out here. It worked. I mean, Dylan Gabriel was the safest, I guess, because he'd been very consistent throughout his career. Even his play style felt safe. Dante Moore probably kind of in between the camps. Had only had 1 year of starting, especially when you suggested, hey, he's gonna take a year. That was built into the transfer. That wasn't that risky of a move. If Dante does go and Dylan winds up being the guy day one here, there's a risk attached to that. Like, and I'll also tell this story. I know Matt, we were both at the Elite 11 camp in Eugene in 2023 or 2024. Do you remember one of those years? One of those springs. And this guy has so much self-confidence at the time. I think we both remarked on it of like, wow, that guy sounds like he's an NFL quarterback in year 5, the way he talks about himself and kind of carries himself. And that is an element that is important at the quarterback position. That self-confidence bordering on kind of arrogance. Like that could be a good thing for a quarterback room coming off a Dante Moore season. I'm just kind of talking out like some of the possible pros here. Like, I think people are kind of wondering, fair or unfair, after the Indiana game in the college football playoff, like, does Dante Moore kind of have that dog in him? I don't think there's any question Dylan Raiola has that dog in him in terms of how he carries himself. It's just a matter of, can he make all the right decisions? And that was some of the issues at Nebraska, along with playing with, and this is something also, Matt, you said context matters early when looking at the PFF grades. And Nebraska's offense, nowhere near as talented as what Oregon will have. The offensive line at Nebraska was kind of a mess at times. So there's a question of kind of what will happen if he steps up. But there's no doubt that this is a risky maneuver here if this ultimately winds up, hey, this is a 2026 starting quarterback in Dylan Raiola. Yes, he was a former 5-star recruit. Yes, he has an impressive arm talent. Yes, he carries himself kind of the way you want a quarterback to a certain degree, or at least to have that sort of confidence. That's kind of required. But like, he's certainly not a finished product. And if you're Oregon, and we'll get to some of the retentions in a minute here, and you're amping up for this to be kind of a go for, swing for it all season, which I know all seasons kind of are at Oregon now, but you've got all these big time players lining up to return. There's a risk attached to relying on a guy who just hasn't been particularly impressive to this point, even if he has all those tools. So yeah, this is a really interesting move. I'm not surprised that they were aggressive here, even with Dante kind of uncertain for 26. But the guy they landed at, like, is definitely a bigger swing than going after maybe a Sam Levitt, right? Or somebody kind of like that had been attached early, where there was, like, Sam Levitt's career to this point is a heck of a lot more impressive than Dylan Raiola's. And they were both in the portal. Sam Levitt's from the state. Obviously, he looks like he's going to LSU, but it's interesting. This is who they chose, I guess, if that was ultimately what it was.
The parallels to Bo Nix are striking here for a second. Let's just look at this. Both were 5-star quarterbacks coming out of high school. Both were players who played in offenses during their times at their previous schools that were underwhelming, that didn't have the talent around them to allow them to 100% succeed. Both of them had up and down, like, freshman seasons where you thought, wow, like, this is going to be a guy that it's going to be a potential Heisman winner down the road, to other than the other spectrum of, wow, this guy's really struggling. Should he be starting right now? Both guys are also coming off leg injuries before they got to Oregon. Bo Nix also suffered an injury and to his lower body prior to coming to the Ducks. And both guys now are getting the same type of response from within the fan base of mixed reviews of, is this really the guy? And I think you have to give Dan Lanning and his coaching staff, even with another different offensive coordinator running the show at Oregon in 2026, the benefit of the doubt, because every portal quarterback they've taken, Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, now Dante Moore, has turned into a top 5 quarterback at the position during the years that they play at Oregon. And you have to give the benefit of the doubt that this is going to work out again in a similar manner for Dylan Raiola. It's just, for me, when does Dylan Raiola take the field? Is it going to be in 2026 or will it be in 2027 after a rehab year?
Here's something for you, Matt. Who are we giving the benefit of the doubt to? Obviously, Dan Lanning, we think Drew Maringer is the offensive coordinator. Who's the quarterback coach, right? Like, that has to be something that was in position in this pitch to Dylan. Obviously, I mean, they haven't made Maringer's hire official either. But like, reading between the lines, Oregon probably isn't able to sway Dylan Raiola without having a very clear path right here of like, this is going to be calling plays. This is who's going to be your quarterback coach. Will was both for Dante last year and for both Dylan and Bo the years prior. There's no clear path publicly to who those guys are. This tells me clearly, and this isn't a surprise because we've known Will and Tosh have been gone for over a month now. I think the Maringer and Hampton news broke probably almost a month ago as well, the suggestion that these were going to be the replacements, hiring in-house or promoting from in-house, I should say. But the quarterback coach thing, I'm still anticipating Maringer is the tight ends coach and they're going to hire a quarterback coach. I'm wondering if we're going to get some news dump there. That's kind of beside the point here, but just something that when you were saying we'll give Dan Lanning the benefit of that, I was also going like, well, who's the staff who's going to be leading this room and leading this player into next season? I think that's something that needs to kind of be fleshed out here. And obviously they seem to have a plan if Dylan was able to sign on to this, to come to Oregon. So that's another thing that's kind of in the back of my head here.
It's a fair question because Maringer hasn't coached quarterbacks in quite some time at the collegiate
level. Like 7 years.
And I think Will Stein and also Kenny Dillingham would probably say the same thing of the importance that Drew had on their abilities to call the offense. Drew was the guy up in the box, giving
Yep.
the high vantage point perspective of what to call, what to look for. A lot of Oregon's coaches leading up to the Orange Bowl praised Drew's ability to help Will and called them, 1A and 1B, not offensive coordinator and assistant offensive coordinator. They worked hand in hand. But you're right. Like, what happens there? Where does Oregon have a quarterback specialist coach come in? Does Drew move over to coach the quarterbacks and someone else coaches the tight ends? Do they promote somebody from within? Koakai would probably be the most likely person to be promoted if they did in-house to coach quarterbacks. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the play there, but that's a good question that's underlying this storyline is who's coaching the quarterbacks, who's developing the quarterbacks, because we don't know yet.
And the flip side is, and this is maybe a natural transition unless we have more Raiola talk.
Oh, let's go for it.
Oregon also landed a tight end commitment on Sunday. So clearly there's a plan put in place, at least within the recruiting pitches of what's going on there. And I would imagine Maringer is retaining that. I mean, because I was looking at just kind of position by position. You could make an argument. It's funny because a couple of years ago, you would have said he's been one of the weak links in terms of player acquisition. But Drew Maringer's room in 2025 was really impressive with Jamari Johnson and Kenyon Sadiq, the most tight end production in school history. And then what they've been able to do since getting Kendra Harrison in line, and now Andrew Olesh, who was a big-time target back in the 2025 class, spent a year at Penn State, didn't really play much there. They end up pulling him from the portal Sunday. That was the Sunday portal acquisition. We've got another transfer portal acquisition to talk about later in the show, also on offense. But Olesh is a really high-end player who probably doesn't need to be much of a contributor right away because of the way this room has been built. Jamari Johnson, I think Matt shared on the post-Orange Bowl podcast, like Maringer
very high on Jamari Johnson, as he should be.
Thinks he could be the best tight end in the country next year. Even without Kenyon Sadiq, you might have a case for that. Roger Saliapaga, I think, made leaps towards the end of the season, looks to be a player. Kendra Harrison, 5-star. Watch. By the way, when we had our open practice before the Peach Bowl, and Kendra was there. He was enrolled and available to participate. He and Jamari look almost identical standing next to each other. They're just gargantuan guys. And like, it's probably going to be great for Kendra to learn from Jamari. So even if Kenyon goes pro, which I think we anticipate is the case, like Olesh doesn't have to be more than tight end 3, maybe. Tight end 2 would be a huge leap. Like he might be tight end 4 behind the 3 guys we mentioned that are 2 of which are returning, one of which is Kendra Harrison. And that says a lot about that tight end depth because this is a guy who, again, was one of, if not the best tight ends in the country back in 2025.
Yeah, you look at Olesh, and he fits the profile of what Oregon likes from an inline blocking. He's a huge dude. Very much. He's not Kendra Harrison, 6'7", 6'8", but he's every bit 6'5.5", close to 6'6". I think he's like 245. Really big bodied guy. And what's really funny, and maybe not funny, but just kind of ironic here, the connections between him and Vanderploeg, who exited the portal shortly before I think Andrew Olesh announced his commitment to Oregon, is these 2 players were tied at the hip in the recruiting process too. Oregon tried rigorously to land Andrew Olesh out of high school, out of the state of Pennsylvania. They were one of the finalists. There were times where it looked like maybe they were going to pull off the kind of big upset of going into Penn State and securing one of their top in-state prospects, and they didn't do it, and they flipped Vanderploeg late in the process from Washington, kind of almost like, if we couldn't get Andrew Olesh, let's get Vanderploeg. And maybe this is too negative to the service of a player that Vanderploeg is. I'm not trying to discredit him at all, but they weren't going to take him unless they didn't get Andrew Olesh, it felt like. That's what it looked like from the outside. And now a year later, they're swapping spots essentially. We'll see where Vanderploeg goes, but he leaves the program. Andrew Olesh comes in, and it's just kind of one of those weird, like, these 2 guys are going to be tied at the hip for a while. Vanderploeg didn't play at all during the 2025 season for Oregon, and neither did Andrew Olesh for Penn State, in a year in which nothing really went right for Penn State. I was a little surprised to see once things kind of went away from their national title aspirations, they didn't play some of the younger guys to see what they could do, see what they have. He just didn't play. And you're right. He's probably tight end 3, tight end 4 on the roster. Assuming Kenyon Sadiq leaves, because if he does come back in a shocking move, he'd be even further down the list. But Jamari Phillips looks like your number 1 option. Roger Saleapaga looks like your number 2. And it'll probably be up to Andrew Olesh and Kendra Harrison to kind of duke it out for 3 and 4. I think they're different players, so maybe that's the path to getting both on the field. But nonetheless, this is a really nice addition to a room that, quite frankly, needed a little bit of an upgrade next season from a depth perspective, because Sadiq is gone. You had 3 guys that you felt really good about, and then there was a pretty big drop-off, I felt like, in 2025.
So this is an SAT question. Andrew Olesh is to Vanderploeg what Dante Moore was to Austin Novosad, essentially. Because it was kind of the weird deal where, and obviously Dante and Austin spent time in Oregon together, but that was the contingency plan after Dante flips, and once Olesh wasn't going to come to Oregon, they went Plug's direction. And obviously we know now that they have Olesh in the fold. I don't know if it was 1-to-1 in terms of the conversation with Plug, but clearly there was no need necessarily to keep him around. Kind of a little bit of a jest there, but I guess a parallel that kind of adds up. So Olesh is like an upside play to me, and I guess in a world where we just saw, and again, good news podcast today, bad news podcast coming later in the week, but when we go through and recap all the departures that took place on Sunday, a lot of departures are kind of Olesh type players, where it's like guy who didn't play a lot, was a pretty decent prospect, had upside, and you would have liked to have kept him for 2027 and beyond. Olesh is like a 2027 and beyond player who could help in 26 if there's need. And maybe we're discrediting him and he's going to battle and maybe he's going to end up being tight end too. Maybe he'll end up outplaying Asali Apaga. He'll end up he's a year older than Kendra Harrison. Maybe he's a year better and he's going to end up being somebody who's more impactful in 26 than anticipated. But just kind of looking at it on paper from our vantage point today on January 12th, it feels like a guy who is 2027 is his year to start making contributions. He could be at that point almost be tight end 1 or 2 because you anticipate at that point Jamari Johnson's clearly gone and we'll see what the development might look like. He might be able to move closer to the top of that group by 27. But this is not somebody I think you're bringing in with expectations to be a day one contributor, which kind of differentiates him from some of these other names. And frankly, I think that's going to be something you're going to be seeing a little bit more this portal cycle because of some of the depth hits that took place, certainly at defensive line and outside linebacker on Sunday, where, gosh, you just lost pretty much all of your key backups there. And again, we'll do the bad news podcast later in the week, but it's interesting to see them kind of taking this approach at a position like tight end, where it seemed like they kind of had a pretty decent looking group, even if they didn't add him. And this feels like a bit of a luxury ad that could turn into, hey, like this ends up being more beneficial early than we expect.
Oregon also secured an offensive line commitment like minutes after Dylan Raiola announced his commitment. Just typical 100% offensive line move here. Just guy comes in, one of the biggest commitments of the portal season happens, one of the biggest names in college football in the portal season announces where he's going. Offensive lineman doesn't care about the limelight. It's going to let him just take all the credit. And announces right after. It's going to get lost in the shuffle. Just a total offensive line move here.
Jake Fisher, DeAnthony Thomas from 12 years ago, or whatever.
Yes. That's a great poll. I had forgotten that was also linked really close to each other. Michael Bennett, or Mikey Bennett, as he likes to go by, from Yale, an offensive tackle, right tackle prospect for the Bulldogs, has entered his name into the portal and has landed at Oregon, was here in Eugene for an official visit over the weekend, and is a guy that brings a ton of experience to the table. I think he played almost 900 snaps of offense this past season for the Bulldogs, and is going to be a guy that will probably push for starter snaps at Oregon at right tackle. Could also be a guy that, quite frankly, if some of those around him at that same position elevate themselves to where maybe they are expected to be, Bennett becomes a rotational piece that can play multiple positions for you. I think it's a solid ad. It's a one to keep pushing the room, the development there and the talent there. And then it's one that's going to get lost in the shuffle simply because of when his commitment and Raiola's commitment were announced.
Yeah, this is a player who was a 74.5 grade on PFF at the FCS level. Very balanced in terms of like solid run grade, solid pass blocking grade, 6'5", 310. He allowed 2 sacks this last year, played right tackle exclusively, 3-year starter at Yale. Gives you a sense of kind of where this fit might be. And, part of me is also thinking like, if you were to, and I just went this exercise earlier in the week and you go look at it, did a projected 2 deep for the offense for 2026. Janoris Wilson was my projected right tackle starter. He's dealing with a broken foot. He suffered pretty similar timeline to Raiola. So it's possible this is hey, we don't know Janoris's future necessarily. We have to have some sort of contingency plan. I imagine it'll be Janoris versus Michael Bennett at right tackle, unless they like Janoris more at left tackle. I mean, we talk about Janoris like he's a right tackle because that's where he filled in for Harkey against Iowa and where he played pretty much exclusively all season. But it's possible that left tackle, he and Crater end up battling there. But I project this is a Bennett versus Janoris right tackle battle, and Janoris might not be available in the spring. He's dealing with a broken foot. We've seen him still on a scooter with his foot in a cast as of the Orange Bowl. For me, Matt, you might have seen him at the Peach Bowl. I'm not sure if you ended up getting eyes on him because they had different access down there than they did for us at the Orange Bowl. But there is not a huge level of clarity at tackle, considering Harkey is gone, considering World is gone. They needed to add a tackle. This is clearly a guy that they targeted. And again, solid PFF grades, was a honorable mention All-American at the FCS level, was an Ivy League first team guy. He's clearly very bright. He was awarded a grant for a social venture plan created as a senior capstone project for global citizenship, addressing lack of accessibility to youth sports due to socioeconomic status. That's in his Yale bio. You get a guy from an Ivy League school, you're getting a little bit of a different type of person typically. And this is an academic. I believe he was like an academic All-American. He was the winner of the Jerry Nason award, honoring a senior student athlete who has achieved success in football against all odds. So this is a guy who's going to bring some maturity, some intelligence to the room. So those parts kind of just stand out on the baseline here. And now it's like, I'll be honest, couldn't really find a lot of tape to watch. So really, really hard to kind of assess what kind of a player he is. Based on PFF, he looks very solid. Going to be interested to see how this translates in terms of him coming over and making contributions, because it's no guarantee that a transfer who had starting experience winds up being that way. Matthew Bedford never ended up being much of a contributor. I know he had knee issues that derailed that venture, but just because you add a player who had some big time success at a previous school doesn't necessarily mean he's going to translate to Oregon. But this feels like a really solid ad more than anything.
Yeah, that's where I'm landing at. Is this could be a guy that is a regular contributor. It also could be a guy that, and you'd be successful with him at that position. And this could also be one of those depth pieces that will make you better when you rotate in some offensive line, whether it's for a jumbo package, or we've seen Oregon historically kind of have one or two swing players that kind of play all over the place. I think this season, in the last two seasons, it's been Kawika Rogers, who's kind of played all over the place as a Swiss Army knife. That could be the play here. I will say, like, back to your question, access was very limited to the team, so we did not get a good eye on Oregon's offensive line. But I think you look at Fox Crater and what he was able to do in the USC game when he started at left tackle, and then you also saw him play basically most of the second half when Isaiah World went out in the Peach Bowl against Indiana. I felt like he held his own. He looked good. Malik Terry at the Orange Bowl raved about Fox Crater, raved about the young offensive line and how they felt like this was a unit that at this time last season, they looked at it and said, they need more time. They're not ready yet. Talent is there, but to have the year that we want and we think we should have with the other positions on offense, we need guys that we can know are going to be ready for the moment. He said this year, that's a different feeling, that there's definitely an idea that some of these younger guys, a Crater, a Janoris Wilson, a Trent Ferguson, can step up next season and be ready for that moment to lead the offense. And quite frankly, you kind of need some of these younger players to start playing, because if you continue to hit the portal every single year and your hit rate at the high school level is 10%, eventually you're not going to land any of these guys because they're going to see a path. They're not going to see a path to playing time. And all it takes is one bad miss eval year and the portal, and your offensive line is atrocious.
Yeah, it's a tough balance.
It's a very tough balance. And it's that way for every position. But I think from a positive standpoint, I think this is a guy that if Oregon needs him to start, they will be able to play at a high level with him, probably at the right tackle position, and a guy that look, you're adding a 3-year starter to your unit. That's really good. And if the worst case scenario is that he's a starter, probably a good thing. And if the best case scenario is he's one of your backups, that tells you how good the guys above him are.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we'll do, by the way, I think once we get through this kind of run of portal decisions, NFL decisions, we still have, by the way, Matt, just to remind you, because I'd almost forgotten. I was like, hey, let's wrap up the show. We still talk about some pretty big retentions on Sunday.
Yeah, the lead has been buried.
But these are also players that Oregon fans are familiar with, so we figured we'd do that at the back end. But later in this week, we will do kind of a breakdown of, like, and we'll have content written on the site as well. But of like what needs to be addressed through the portal. Because Oregon has lost, I think, almost 25 players now to the transfer portal as of last night. There's definitely some work to do. This feels like a very nice start, right? And we should also acknowledge they've added a long snapper, they've added a punter, they added a kicker. That was all pre Peach Bowl, I believe, kind of in that first run there. So there's been some, we haven't really touched on those players, and maybe we'll find a time to do that. I don't know if that's right now because, again, we could go for a long time. There's so much going on right now in terms of roster building for 26. But I feel like 6 additions so far, 3 in offense, 3 special teams, addressed some positions of need, added some key depth pieces. I think it's a nice start here. And again, if Dante does choose to come back and Raiola is in a reserve position for 26 and then is ready to be the starter in 27, that feels like a, make your cake, eat your cake kind of situation there for Oregon. I think that would be a really, really big win, a la what happened with Dante, obviously, in 24 to 25.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll go to the other big news that it's 36 minutes into the podcast, and we've yet to even bring up, which is a pretty telling moment how big the news has been for Oregon. So we'll take a quick break and come right back. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Really burying a lead here because of the portal additions and how important they are, and the newness of a player joining a program is always exciting. We wanted to touch on that first. But quite frankly, probably the bigger news of the day so far, or I should say of the weekend from an Oregon retainment addition perspective, is their ability to go 4 for 4 along its front 7 defensive line and bring back those players for a senior season and final year of college football. Bear Alexander, obviously defensive tackle, announced back in early December he was returning to Oregon. A victory that felt like, hey, like maybe a month ago this didn't seem likely. Bummer one year guy, but really good to see a guy turn his career around to, oh my gosh, Bear Alexander's coming back. That's a pretty significant move. And then it became, can you just go 2 for 4? Can you get one more of your big 4 juniors to return along the front 7? And Teitum Tuioti was the first one to announce that he was back. I think that was probably the most likely of the 3 guys to choose to come back, even though he's probably, in my opinion, maybe the best of the 3.
Been the most productive by a country mile of everybody else, yeah.
And then we got Matayo Uiagalelei announcing he's coming back. Statistically, he had a down year as a junior compared to his sophomore season. I credit that to he's just being game planned against now when he wasn't the year before. And then the big one, maybe the most surprising of all of them, is Amari Washington announced he's back. Our favorite quote, a guy that's straight up awesome to talk to post-game. It's probably why Nate Kruger, SID at Oregon, doesn't let Amari Washington, or maybe it's Dan Lanning, doesn't let Amari Washington speak unless they're contractually obligated to let every player speak because, man, awesome quote, even better player. He's also back for Oregon.
This is really significant. I mean, the thing that's interesting is I was looking even a week ago, they after the regular season ends in the NFL, the next day is always like the first big NFL mock draft that drops because at least half of the order is set. So you can kind of start making a little bit more team specific analysis. I think I did 8 or 9 mocks, and Matayo and Amari were in like a third of them in the first round. So these were guys that even earlier this month were seen as potential first round draft picks. So to retain both of those guys, and both of them kind of up and down seasons. Like I don't think I mentioned the production for Teitum was fantastic. I don't think the production for either of those guys kind of matched what you were expecting or hoping for. Like Amari had, I think, 4.5 tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks, batted a lot of balls down at the line of scrimmage. But in terms of like in the backfield production, maybe didn't match the first round grade. But this is someone with like probably the quickest first step I've seen for an Oregon defensive lineman, specifically on the interior, ever. Like there are so many instances where he's just like ball snapped, he's in the backfield, almost beats the ball off the out of the center's hand. Like he is so quick and dynamic there, but some stuff he still needs to work on in terms of like not over pursuing. He has a habit of kind of getting stood up at times at the line of scrimmage. So certainly some things to work on, but athletically, this guy is so elite. So to have him and Bear for another year, and then Matayo and Teitum, this is going to go down as one of the better pass rushing edge duos Oregon has had in terms of just 3 years of it. And, if you go look at the school record book, like these guys are going to finish in the top half-ish of the top 10 in tackles for loss and sacks by the time everything ends, assuming they have strong senior seasons because they've been so productive for so long. So retaining all of these guys is huge. I won't say that their last game was perfect or that they had fantastic seasons throughout. I will say Teitum did, but the other three kind of up and down a little bit. Like I thought Bear was the better interior lineman the first half of the regular season. I thought he kind of fell off, and Amari was better, but not elite the back half. And Matayo was just kind of production-wise very hit and miss all season. Obviously, Texas Tech being a memorable instance where he had a big play. But this is massive. And really what this feels like to me, Matt, is, and we've seen this a couple times in the Big Ten recently, where teams have a kind of a core cohort of guys say, hey, we want to win the whole thing. We're going to come back and try to do this together. And we saw Ohio State do it in 24. It was successful. We saw Penn State try to do it in 25. It was not successful. It was a far cry from that. I don't think there's any world where Oregon goes 6 or 7 wins like Penn State did, or whatever they ended up with in 26. But this is shaping up to be we're bringing as many of these guys back. We're trying to make a shot at, we're trying to make the most of a final season here and take a shot to win a national championship. And clearly those guys are coming back because they all mentioned unfinished business in their little clips or posts that they made on social media on Sunday.
Yeah, look, to win a national championship, you have to have a bunch of NFL dudes. And I think we saw that with Ohio State in the 2024 season. We are probably going to see that with Indiana this season. They have a lot of NFL guys on that roster. Oregon's going to bank on the fact that you probably have now a first-round draft pick starting at defensive tackle in Amari Washington. You probably have 3 other guys that are second to third round, fourth round draft picks, and Matayo and Teitum and Bear along your defense. Your front 4 are going to be all NFL players next year. Honestly, Erik, like, would you be shocked if 3 of those guys are first round draft picks in the 2027 NFL draft?
Maybe not all. No, I wouldn't be shocked. And I will put it this way: I think all 4 will be day 2 picks at worst. I think I'm pretty comfortable saying that right now.
Now, the trick becomes, can Oregon's new DC, whoever that is, we expect it to be Chris Hampton, can you elevate this unit to be even better? The defense was really good in 2025. The production, the run defense, it was all high. But I think the one thing that was missing was Oregon's inability to generate sacks on a consistent basis in 2025. They ranked 44th in the country. They had 30 total sacks. They averaged 2 sacks per game. I think you look at the national championship game and the matchup between Indiana and Miami, their defenses are all elite. Miami leads the country in sacks with 47. Indiana is tied for second with 45.
Yeah.
You look at Texas A&M, they were 4th in the country in sacks. Texas Tech was 6th in the country in sacks. Even James Madison was higher up than Oregon. They were 16th in the country. Ohio State was 21st. Point here is that for Oregon, that's the next step. You were really good against the run. You were really good in tackles for loss against the run, but you got to be able to generate more pressure on the quarterback to give your secondary help. And in the 2 games that they lost this past season, excuse me, their pass rush was ineffective in beating up Fernando Mendoza. And if you had the ability to do that, they were consistently having to bring the house and set you up for one-on-one situations, and they consistently won those battles. So I guess the challenge becomes make this group even better. And for as good as they are, if they get better, it's a scary sight because they're already a talented group. And quite frankly, they're going to be one of the best front fours in college football next season.
No question. And to your point about sack production, they need another guy other than Teitum and Matayo off the edge to be a difference maker regularly. I mean, I was really impressed with both Blake Purchase and Ashton Porter. Those are guys that are now in the portal, specifically on rundowns. And in Blake's case, in a lot of situations, but as a pass rusher, wasn't always particularly impactful. Like I had a great quote from Amari Washington about Blake's second sack of the season, which came against Texas Tech on New Year's Day, where it was basically a free sack, he said. And he's like, this guy's taking care of the homeless and doing all this stuff because God blesses you with free sacks because you do all the right things. And that was only his second sack of the season. And again, it was a case where the offensive tackle just didn't even see him. He ran around and brought him down. That's not to say that sack counts differently necessarily, but it wasn't like he was a massive, pass rush production player. Nasir Wyatt's production in limited snaps, this guy had 3 sacks in about 30 snaps this season. He's going to be a guy I'm circling right now as, I don't know if he can play on first and second down regularly, but when it is a clear pass situation, he needs to be playing almost every down because he is so dynamic coming off the edge. And that could be a player who really helps a Teitum or a Matayo get home a little bit more, because they're going to have to be aware that from both sides, they're going to have some speed coming at it. They're going to have a player who can really change the pocket for an offense. So it's not just those 2 guys, but they need some help from other players on the outside. I look at Nasir Wyatt as a name, Elijah Rushing, who's still with the group, Tank Jones, obviously a 5-star freshman, maybe can be a contributor. And then Amari and Bear combined have 2.5 sacks from the interior. And that's not to say, you expect to have incredible sack production from the interior of your line. It's harder to get home from those spots, consistently. But you go back a year and you look at the production that you saw with Derek Harmon, who had 5 sacks. Jamari Caldwell didn't have a lot of production at Oregon, but the year before that at Louisville, he was somebody who was impactful. But 5 sacks from Derek Harmon, and so an interior player, stands out when they only had half that from your 2 key starting guys in 2025. So need some production there. And Amari in particular feels like someone who has all the tools. I mentioned that quick first step to get home more regularly. The fact that you look up at the end of the season and he didn't even get to 2 total sacks is definitely something he needs to work on, is being more impactful in that part.
Nonetheless, though, this is a huge domino to fall for Oregon. Sets up the stage for, I think the expectations is Oregon should have probably a top 10 defense in all the major team categories of yards allowed, passing yards allowed, rushing yards allowed, scoring allowed, red zone success. This defense, even if Dylan Raiola decides to leave the NFL, I think you look at this group and say, because of the front four and the development of a couple guys at the linebacker position, mainly Jerry Mixon, you also have your 3 freshmen in the secondary that started all returning for sophomore seasons. The expectation is this defense continues to make a jump, and it's going to be powered by these 4 returning, which leads us to maybe, unless you got more here that you want to talk about?
No, I'm good. What else do you got?
I was just going to say the closing remarks for the retention piece now falls on Dylan Raiola, and does he return for a 4th season of college football, a 2nd season for Oregon, and does he spearhead the back end of the secondary, and what does Dante Moore and Kenyon Sadiq do? Those feels like the NFL options that are still on the table that have to be decided. We kind of feel like Kenyon Sadiq is going to go pro.
Yes.
Dante Moore looks like is trending towards returning. We'll see what happens there, but look, if he goes, I have no ill will towards a guy saying I'm going to be the number 2 pick in the NFL draft. I want to go. Like, makes total sense to me. Dylan Raiola feels like the one that could go either way. You don't really have a good read on it, and that could really maybe decide the true scope of this defense. Is if he comes back, now all of a sudden we could be talking about maybe the best defense in college football.
Yeah, that would give them arguably the best safety, especially with Caleb Downs announcing he's going pro. And it's also notable that Coy Parrish, one of the other top safeties in the Big Ten, a Minnesota player, is in the portal, was at Oregon over the weekend. They're still clearly doing their due diligence there, regardless of what Dylan's decision ends up being. So these next couple of days are going to be massive in determining next season. And if Kenyon Sadiq winds up being the only player who goes pro from this team early, that's going to be a massive win for Dan Lanning and this staff, because there were a handful of guys that were going to be first day, second day picks, we think, that they'll be retaining and bringing back. And that's how that's how you make a run at something like this. Oregon had a ton of talent this last year. If they can retain some of that talent, angry talent that has been through, I mean, you think about these 3 guys on the defensive line that all announced on Sunday they're coming back. They went through back-to-back seasons that ended with absolute embarrassments in college football playoff games. A really fitting end to their careers would be the breakthrough after a couple of disappointments. We'll see if that happens. A third year of more disappointment would be kind of soul-crushing for that group, I'm sure, because their intent in coming back is to win the whole thing. And if they can get Dante to sign on, if they can get Dylan to sign on, I think Sadiq is probably just too much of an ask given what people at the next level think. But if there's a world where they get all of them back, then you're really seeing it shape up to being like, hey, we're bringing everybody back with a mission. Let's see if we can do something. And that should make Oregon fans excited, coming off of a really, really disappointing season where I bet you our listenership is pretty down for this podcast, Matt, compared to where it's been other times. Because I think a lot of fans are just like, I don't want to even think about Oregon football right now. But once the emotions of everything settle, if Oregon's able to retain almost all these guys, there's reason to be really excited about what 2026 can be.
Going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back breaking down the departures, because there have been a handful of departures, multiple
handfuls, Matt.
Multiple handfuls of departures here for the Ducks. And it's, on one hand, it's a half glass empty things moment, but I think there's a lot of context that needs to be provided, and that might change your opinion on those departures, at least of how maybe you should feel. So look forward to that coming out this week. And then look, portal commitments are going to continue to happen. NFL decisions are going to be happening here soon. And when those get made, we will be on the podcast as well, breaking those down as well. So for now, we'll be back on Wednesday. We could be back later today for all we know.
Matt, it was an upset that there wasn't any news that broke during the 54 minutes we've been on this show, to be honest.
But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.